Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
So today we're looking at a paper that was actually part of the session readings for the Virtual Summer School in Entrepreneurship Research 2025.
Oh, right. That initiative. It's been running since, 2021?
That's it. So this is its fifth year, which is fantastic. And it's a no-fee summer school, completely focused on entrepreneurship research.
Which is such a great resource for the community.
Absolutely. It's structured, I think, with 5 sessions. Each has 4 papers, plus sometimes they do book reviews.
Sounds about right. A really solid program.
And we should definitely give a shout out to the organizers, Professor Vishal K. Gupta and PhD candidate Athena Skiadokoulou, both from the University of Alabama. They've really spearheaded this.
Yeah, hats off to them for putting together such a unique and valuable program.
So the specific paper we're diving into today, it tackles the relationship between an entrepreneur's gender and their access to bank finance.
Right, it's a meta-analysis. The title is A Meta-Analysis of the Impact of Entrepreneurs' Gender on Their Access to Bank Finance by Malmström and colleagues from 2024.
Okay, and a meta-analysis, just to clarify for everyone, is where researchers pull together data from, a whole bunch of previous studies, right?
Exactly. It lets you see the bigger picture, statistically speaking. Instead of just one data point, you're looking at the combined weight of evidence.
And this was pretty substantial. It's synthesized 31 different studies spanning about 20 years.
20 years? That's a lot of data focused on this specific question. How does gender affect getting bank loans for entrepreneurs?
And the paper makes a key point early on. The results from individual studies haven't always been consistent. Sometimes finding a gap, sometimes not.
Which suggests, that maybe it's not just about the individual entrepreneur, the context matters.
Right, the broader social environment they're operating in.
Precisely. So the researchers developed this model looking specifically at social gender norms. How do those norms potentially explain the different experiences men and women have when they go to a bank?
And they looked at it from 2 angles.
Yeah, basically 2 main aspects of a woman's social standing in a society. First, the sort of formal side measured by the country's political ideology. Does it lean more traditional or more towards social change?
Okay, traditional versus progressive, roughly speaking.
Sort of. And second, the informal side, which they gauged by looking at the level of women's empowerment in that society.
How do they measure that?
Things like the percentage of women in government, women in management roles, indicators like that.
Got it. So the big questions they're asking are, 1, how much difference does gender actually make in getting bank loans?
And 2, crucially, how do these bigger societal factors to the political climate, women's empowerment levels, how do they influence that relationship?
That's what we really want to unpack today.
Yeah.
Because it seems like the answer isn't straightforward.
Not at all. By looking at these societal factors, they're trying to understand not just if there's a gender gap in funding, but why it might be bigger or smaller or maybe look different depending on where you are in the world.
And they use some established theories to help frame this.
They do. They draw on things like role congruity theory and social dominance theory, which we can definitely circle back to. They help make sense of some of the findings.
Okay, sounds good. But first things first, after crunching the numbers from those 31 studies, what did they find overall about gender and bank finance?
Well, the main takeaway, maybe unsurprisingly for some, is that yes, there is a difference. On average, women entrepreneurs seem to face more hurdles.
Hurdles like?
Specifically, their loan applications are more likely to be rejected compared to similar applications from men entrepreneurs.
Okay, so a lower success rate in just getting approved.
That's the first part. But it's not just about getting the yes or no.
There's more to it.
Yeah. The study also found that when women entrepreneurs do get approved for a loan, they often face higher interest rates than men do for comparable loans.
Wow. So harder to get the loan in the first place, and then potentially more expensive when you do get it.
Exactly. That definitely creates a tougher financial situation for women-led businesses right from the start.
Okay, so that's the general picture. Now, let's bring in that social context you mentioned. How did political ideology fit in?
This was quite interesting. They found a pretty clear link. In societies that scored higher on conservative political ideology, emphasizing more traditional structures, the gap in interest rates between men and women entrepreneurs was even wider. Women in those contexts paid comparatively more.
So a more conservative political environment seems to kind of amplify that interest rate penalty for women.
That's what the data suggests, yes.
Yes.
Significant finding.
Okay, now for the other piece of the puzzle, women's empowerment. This is where things got a bit unexpected, right?
They really did. So remember, they measured this using things like women in parliament, women in management, indicators of women gaining influence.
Right. You'd intuitively think, okay, more women empowered, things should get fairer, less bias maybe.
That would be the logical assumption. But the meta-analysis found the opposite. In societies with greater measured women's empowerment,
Yes.
the gender discrimination, both in terms of loan or rejection and in terms of interest rates, was actually more pronounced.
Wait, hold on. So where women are seemingly doing better in terms of representation and power, they face more bias from banks.
Precisely. It sounds completely paradoxical, I know.
It really does.
Yeah.
How did the researchers even begin to explain that?
This is where those theories come in handy. They lean heavily on social dominance theory here.
Okay, remind me what that is.
So social dominance theory basically talks about societal hierarchies. Groups try to maintain their position. In this context, the idea is that as women gain empowerment and potentially challenge the traditionally male-dominated financial sector, this perceived challenge can trigger a reaction from the dominant group. Sort of a defensive mechanism.
A backlash.
Kind of. It might manifest as reinforcing traditional gender stereotypes, leading to more discriminatory behavior, paradoxically, as a way to maintain the existing power balance.
Wow. So women's progress itself could inadvertently trigger resistance and bias in these established institutions.
That's the argument based on social dominance theory, yes. It's a sobering interpretation. They also bring in role congruity theory.
And that one is about?
That's about the perceived fit between the traits we associate with a group and the traits needed for a certain role. So, think about the stereotypical successful entrepreneur, often seen as assertive, decisive, maybe risk-taking traits, sometimes stereotypically coded as masculine.
Right. And traditional female stereotypes might be seen as more communal, nurturing, maybe less aligned with that aggressive business image.
Exactly. Role congruity theory suggests there's a perceived mismatch. And the paper argues that in societies where women are gaining empowerment and visibly challenging traditional roles, this perceived incongruity might actually become more salient or feel more threatening to those holding traditional views within banks.
The very act of women stepping into these entrepreneurial roles, especially where they're gaining broader societal power, might make the perceived mismatch feel even stronger to some law officers.
That's the idea. It suggests it's not a simple linear path where more women leaders automatically equals less bias lower down. There are these complex social dynamics pushing back.
That's complex. I mean, just focusing on getting women into leadership, while important, might not be enough on its own to fix this funding gap.
That's a crucial takeaway from this study. Women's empowerment is vital, obviously, but it doesn't seem to be a magic bullet for eliminating bias in bank lending, at least not yet. It points to the need to address the biases within the financial industry more directly.
So, thinking about that, what are the implications here? What should policymakers or, the banks themselves take away from this?
Well, for policymakers, it highlights that interventions need to be really targeted at reducing these deep-seated biases. It's not just about general empowerment initiatives.
Like what kind of interventions?
Maybe things like mandatory bias training for loan officers, developing clearer, more objective lending criteria, perhaps creating support programs specifically designed to help women navigate the application process, knowing these biases exist.
Okay. And for the banks and lenders?
For them, it's really a call to look inward, to critically examine their own lending practices, their assumptions about what makes a good borrower or a promising venture, and to actively work against letting gender stereotypes influence decisions, acknowledging the potential they might be missing out on by undervaluing women-led businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense. The research also pointed towards future directions, didn't it? Where should researchers look next?
Definitely. The authors had several suggestions. One was about how women's empowerment was measured mostly high-level leadership.
Right, like women in parliament.
Yeah. So future research could look at different levels of women's leadership. Does representation in middle management have a different effect than representation at the very top, for example?
That's a good point. Maybe the impact trickles down differently.
Possibly. They also suggested exploring nonlinear effects. Maybe the relationship isn't straightforward. Perhaps bias increases initially as empowerment grows, but then decreases after a certain threshold is passed.
Like a U-shape.
Exactly. Their own supplementary analysis hinted at something like that, but it needs much more investigation. It suggests the dynamic is likely quite complex over time.
Okay. Any other big areas?
Yes, looking beyond just bank loans.
Huh?
This study was focused there, but what about other funding sources?
The crowdfunding, venture capital, angel investors.
Precisely. Do these same patterns hold? How does political ideology or women's empowerment play out in those different funding ecosystems? That's a whole other important area to explore.
Lots to dig into still. So this has been really fascinating. Let's just quickly recap the main points for everyone.
Sure. So the big picture from this meta-analysis, women entrepreneurs generally face higher loan rejection rates, and when they get loans, they tend to pay higher interest rates compared to men.
Okay, finding number one.
Finding number two. That interest rate gap seems to be even wider in societies with a stronger conservative political ideology.
Got it. And the paradoxical one.
Finding number three. Surprisingly, in societies with more measured women's empowerment, like more women in leadership, the gender discrimination in both loan rejection and interest rates actually appeared greater.
And the theories helping us to understand that are role congruity.
The perceived mismatch between female stereotypes and entrepreneur stereotypes.
And social dominance theory.
Suggesting that increasing empowerment can be seen as a threat, potentially triggering more bias as a way to maintain existing hierarchies.
It really paints a complex picture. So as we wrap up, it leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Given all this, What are the truly effective ways forward?
Yeah, how do we foster genuinely equitable access to funding?
Exactly. How do we make sure that progress for women at the top actually translates into real, tangible benefits for women entrepreneurs trying to get their businesses off the ground or scale up, especially when it comes to getting that crucial funding?
It's clearly a tricky interplay between gender, societal norms, politics, and economics.
Definitely something that needs ongoing focus and really thoughtful strategies. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.